The air in the War Council chamber felt thick, like a smothering weight pressing against General Vorkutha's chitinous exoskeleton. He had faced death on 1,000 battlefields, seen war in its rawest, most violent form. Planets burning, fleets shattered, entire civilizations erased from existence. And yet, nothing had ever unsettled him, until now. Across from him sat the human ambassador, Commander Ethan Graves. The man radiated the kind of calm that only true killers possessed. His uniform was unadorned, unremarkable. No extravagant metals, no ornamental armor, just simple fabric and steel. It was the eyes that sent a chill through Vorkutha's spine. Cold, piercing, utterly without fear. The Galactic Council had demanded negotiations, believing that the war between the Zelvari Dominion and the Terran Union could be avoided. Vorkuth had entertained the notion, until he heard the stories. Graves leaned forward slightly, his fingers laced together, voice eerily measured. "You ever hear about the Dead Sun campaign?" Vorkuth said nothing. He had no desire to hear yet another human war story, but something in the way the commander spoke kept him rooted in place, unwilling, no, unable, to move. Graves smirked. "Thought not. It's classified. But since you and I are about to become intimately familiar, I'll tell you a little something." Vorkutha's mandibles clicked in agitation. "We fought the Carthid swarm for 6 years," Graves continued, "a race of planet devourers. They didn't negotiate. Didn't surrender. They had one purpose: consume everything in their path. Every species they encountered fell. The Voltari? Gone. The Auric? Eradicated. Even the mighty Zentar Dominion couldn't stop them. 1,000 systems lost. We were next." Vorkuth already knew of the Carthid swarm. The mere mention of them sent fear rippling through most species. He also knew they had vanished, but humanity had never spoken of how. Graves exhaled slowly. "We fought tooth and nail. Every battle was desperate. Every system we lost put us closer to extinction. But then," he chuckled darkly, "then we decided to win." A silence stretched between them. "What did you do?" Vorkutha's voice was barely above a whisper. Graves tilted his head. "We introduced them to the concept of starvation." Vorkuth frowned. "They consumed biological matter, right? Needed to feed their endless hordes. But we realized something. They didn't adapt quickly. Their biology was predictable. So we seeded 100 systems with poisoned worlds, planets rich with life but laced with engineered neurotoxins. They feasted. Then they died." Vorkuth felt his twin hearts stutter. "We watched entire Carthid armadas go dark overnight. Their queens starved, their warriors cannibalized each other. We didn't even have to fire a shot after that. The few survivors surrendered." Vorkuth swallowed hard. The swarm was gone. He had always assumed some natural disaster, an unforeseen plague. But the humans, they had done this? Graves leaned in closer, his voice softer now. "That's just one story." Vorkuth realized, with horrifying certainty, that there were more. And the way Graves smiled sent a shiver through his battle-hardened soul. Vorkuth tried to steady his breathing. His exoskeletal fingers twitched involuntarily, a subtle tremor he had never experienced before, not in the face of war, not in the face of death. And yet, the human sitting across from him, this Ethan Graves, was calmly sipping from a metal flask, as if he hadn't just described the methodical extermination of an apex predator species. "Not a fan of that one, huh?" Graves mused, his voice edged with something between amusement and something darker. "Fair enough. The Carthid weren't exactly civilized. You Zelvari, on the other hand? You're more structured. You have an empire, rules, traditions. That's what makes this little meeting so interesting." Vorkuth forced himself to focus. He was Zelvari Dominion's supreme war strategist. He had led countless campaigns, crushed rebellions, orchestrated planetary sieges. And yet, Graves was speaking as if humanity allowed the Dominion to exist. Vorkuth leaned forward slightly, regaining some of his composure. "You believe these war stories will frighten me into surrender?" His mandibles clicked in challenge. "We Zelvari have our own horrors. Our own victories. Your race is young. We have conquered civilizations before you even left your homeworld." Graves grinned. "Yeah, I read about those." Vorkuth narrowed his eyes. Graves adjusted his seating and exhaled through his nose. "You ever hear of the harrowing of Black Reach?" The chamber grew eerily silent. Vorkutha's mandibles tightened. "That is a myth." Graves chuckled, shaking his head. "No, my friend. That was the first time the universe should have learned what happens when you push humans too far." Vorkuth did know the story, but it was never confirmed. Black Reach had been a Zelvari stronghold centuries ago. It was a fortress world, impenetrable, its orbital defenses capable of annihilating entire fleets. When humanity's expeditionary forces attempted to establish footholds in neighboring systems, the Zelvari took action. They struck first. The Terran colonies were wiped clean, their fleets driven back. Humanity was forced to retreat. And then, the record stopped. Black Reach fell silent. The Zelvari forces stationed there never reported back. No distress signals. No debris fields indicating battle. The planet was simply gone. Official records claimed it had been a spatial anomaly, but many in the Dominion feared the truth. Vorkith straightened. "You are claiming responsibility?" Graves tapped his fingers against the metal table. "Not me personally, but my people? Oh yeah, we were very responsible." His tone was disturbingly casual. "You see, we don't like being backed into a corner. Your people didn't just wipe out a few soldiers, they killed entire civilian settlements. Families. Kids. And that's when humanity stops playing by the rules." The chamber felt colder. Vorkith remained silent. Graves continued, his tone now devoid of amusement. "The Dominion assumed we'd respond with a fleet, send ships, clash in space, fight a traditional war. But humans, we understand something most species don't." His gaze sharpened. "You don't need to destroy a fleet to win. You don't even need to fight one." A knot formed in Vorkith's gut. Graves leaned in. "We sent exactly 12 people to Black Reach." Vorkith's twin hearts skipped a beat. 12 infiltrators. No battleships. No armies. No orbital bombardment. Graves' eyes darkened. And when they were done, there wasn't a single Zelvari left alive. Vorkith's throat felt dry. "They breached your bunkers. Poisoned your food supplies. Shut down your planetary defenses. Do you know how long it took for your entire force to die?" Graves tilted his head. Vorkith's mandibles clenched. 6 hours. The words echoed. Vorkith struggled to process them. The logistics of it, the sheer impossibility, how? Graves shrugged. When the next Dominion fleet arrived, they found nothing but silence. No corpses. No wreckage. No sign of what had happened. Your empire was so terrified, they buried the event under spatial anomaly reports. Vorkith's claws curled against the metal table. He felt exposed, as though the entire concept of war had been rewritten before his very eyes. Graves exhaled slowly. "So tell me, General, you really think your Dominion is ready for a war with us?" Vorkith could no longer meet his gaze. And for the first time in his long, blood-soaked career, he felt fear. Vorkith tried to steady himself, but something inside him had cracked. Graves' words echoed in his mind. 6 hours. A planetary stronghold reduced to silence in half a rotation. Not by fleets. Not by mass destruction. But by 12 humans. It was impossible. It had to be impossible. And yet, Vorkith could not refute it. The Dominion's records had long suppressed the truth of Black Reach. His own strategic division had deemed it an anomaly, an unexplainable loss. But now, for the first time, he understood. It wasn't an anomaly. It was a warning. And his people had ignored it. Graves leaned back, watching Vorkith with an almost lazy expression. But Vorkith knew better now. That casual stance? It was a predator's patience. Humans didn't need to bare their fangs to be terrifying. They were terrifying simply by being what they were. "You're lying," Vorkith rasped, but the words felt hollow. Graves just smiled. Not a sneer, not mockery, just calm, quiet confidence. "Am I?" Vorkith's mind raced. He had seen deception before, heard warriors boast, seen commanders bluff. But there was no deception in the human's eyes. Only something worse. Conviction. Vorkith exhaled sharply. "If humanity was so powerful, why have you not conquered the stars?" Graves chuckled. "Oh, we could. But that's not really our thing." Vorkith narrowed his eyes. Graves' expression darkened. "You see, we don't fight for conquest. We fight for survival. And when humans have to fight..." He let the question hang as if Vorkith should already know the answer. And in some ways he did. The Dominion fought wars to expand. To dominate. To break and bend species to their will. But if humanity truly fought only when they had to, when they had been backed into a corner, when survival was at stake, then that meant every war they engaged in was not one of conquest, but of extermination. Vorkith swallowed. What happened to the 12? Graves' smile faded. "Oh, that's the best part." He leaned forward, voice low. "They're still out there." Vorkith stiffened. "You see, we don't throw away our best," Graves said. "Those 12? They've been in the dark ever since. Watching. Waiting. Only sent out when someone makes the mistake of thinking humanity is weak. A shudder crawled up Vorkith's spine. You keep them hidden? Graves chuckled, shaking his head. Not hidden. Just patient. Vorkith could barely comprehend the implications. 12 ghosts, wandering the shadows of the galaxy, unleashed only when humanity deemed a threat beyond reason. Not a military force. Not a fleet. But a handful of specialists with the skill to erase entire armies. The Dominion had never encountered an enemy like this. And now it seemed they had pushed humanity too far. Vorkith straightened. He had spent decades as a supreme war strategist. He had mapped out planetary invasions, analyzed countless threats. But for the first time in his life he had no counter-strategy. You're afraid now, Graves said simply. I can see it. Vorkith clenched his mandibles. I am not. Graves smirked. Liar. Silence stretched between them. Vorkith inhaled slowly. He had no words, no threats left to offer. Because what did one say to a species that knew fear, but had learned to weaponize it? His claws curled against the table. His only remaining thought was simple. The Dominion had made a mistake. Vorkith's mind raced. His claws trembled against the cold steel of the table, his throat dry as dust. The 12. Not a myth. Not an exaggeration. An unseen blade in the dark. And his people, the Dominion, had never known. They had never understood the nightmare they had been toying with. Graves exhaled as if the conversation had grown tiresome. He leaned forward again, his voice quiet, yet carrying the weight of something far heavier than threats. You see, Vorkith, humans don't fear war the way you think we should. Vorkith's mandibles clicked as he tried to swallow his growing dread. You claim to hate it. To fight only when you must. Graves nodded. True. Then why are you so good at it? Graves smiled, but it wasn't amusement. It wasn't mockery. It was something colder. Because we learned. The human's voice dropped to something that barely resembled speech. It was history wrapped in steel, a whisper of ancient violence, a quiet reminder of what happened to those who thought humans couldn't endure. For thousands of years we fought each other, Graves said. Not aliens. Not invaders. Just ourselves. Vorkith stiffened. We bled our own species dry over land, over gods, over flags. We burned cities just to prove a point. We slaughtered millions because we could. And when we finally set foot in the stars, we were already veterans of a war that never truly stopped. Graves leaned back, stretching his arms. So when some alien empire, bigger than anything we had ever known, came along and thought they could intimidate us? He scoffed. Well, let's just say we weren't impressed. Vorkith's stomach churned. This was wrong. All wrong. War was supposed to break species. Civilizations fought among themselves, yes. But eventually the cost became too great. The fires of war would die, replaced by an age of peace. That was the cycle. But humanity hadn't followed that cycle. They had fed on war. Adapted to it. And now it seemed they had outgrown the need to be afraid of it at all. Vorkith inhaled slowly, his mind calculating the repercussions. The Dominion could not afford this war. They had already lost, they just didn't know it yet. It was no longer a matter of victory. It was a matter of how much humanity was willing to tolerate before they erased the Dominion from the stars entirely. He took a deep breath. I must return to my people. Graves tilted his head. Oh. Vorkith forced himself to meet the human's gaze. This war is unwise. Graves grinned. Took you long enough. Vorkith's pride screamed at him to retaliate, to hold his ground. But there was no ground left to stand on. Not against an enemy that did not fight for conquest, nor power, nor wealth, but for survival. And if humanity had proven one thing above all else, it was this. When forced to survive, they did not lose. Vorkith rose from the table, his legs feeling unsteady beneath him. You will hear from my people soon. I will ensure they understand the cost of their choices. Graves nodded. Smart. Vorkith hesitated. Tell me one thing, human. If you were in my place, would you surrender? Graves exhaled, considering the question. Then slowly his lips curled into a smirk. No, he said. I'd fight to the last breath. Vorkith shuddered. That was the difference. Humans didn't surrender because they were afraid of death. They fought because they had already made peace with it. And that, more than anything, made them the most terrifying species the galaxy had ever known. The end. Did this story send chills down your spine? Subscribe now for more terrifying tales of humanity's unmatched resilience.